For any of you who might be new to Better Earth or to our Composting Conversations webinar, Better Earth is a sustainable packaging provider in Atlanta, Georgia, and we're on a mission to make sustainability accessible and regenerative circularity achievable. Today, we're going to be hearing from composters and industry leaders, so I'm so excited to introduce you to our panel. So to start off, we have Clinton Sander, and Clinton joined A1 Organics in July of 2018. He worked in the retail natural foods industry, creating marketing initiatives, brand campaigns, and innovative merchandising techniques. He is very passionate about regenerative practices, sustainability, family, and giving back to your community. Clinton has seen firsthand the importance and value of diverting organics out of landfills within a commercial retail food environment and the contamination challenges this environment creates. As the marketing manager for A1 Organics, Clinton actively works on marketing initiatives and communication strategies focused on the amazing environmental benefits of compost application and organics recycling. Clinton, feel free to give a wave.
Hello.
Awesome. Next, we have Wendell. Wendell Simonson is the marketing director for the Biodegradable Products Institute, also known as BPI, and is responsible for all aspects of the marketing function, including content development, communication strategy, brand management, and member engagement. Wendell also works on education and advocacy at BPI and has led efforts to produce BPI's roadmap for increased organics diversion via a single set of acceptability criteria for compostable products and the first ever set of industry guidelines for labeling and identification of compostable products. Prior to joining BPI, Wendell spent 10 years building the marketing function at Eco Products in Boulder, Colorado. Wendell, feel free to give us a wave, let the folks know who you are. Awesome. And next we have Mitch Hedlund. In 2010, Mitch created the first and only society-wide standardized labeling system for recycling bins to make it possible for the public to be able to recycle properly wherever they are. The standardized labels works for all types of recycling programs. There are now more than 9 million standardized labels displayed on recycling bins, where they're continuously proved to increase recycling levels 50 to 400% and reduce public mistakes at recycling bins significantly, often entirely. Mitch and the nonprofit organization Recycle Across America are now pursuing state and federal legislation for the standardized labels for recycling bins, following the same logic and legislative path as federally mandated standardized road signs, which allow people to drive properly throughout the country. Mitch is a frequent contributor to media on the subject of recycling and the environment, including New York Times, CBS This Morning, NBC Nightly News, Intercept, Forbes Magazine, Chicago Tribune, USA Today, and industry publications. She is an ongoing national and international speaker, including providing the keynote presentation at the European Union's Environmental Summit in Brussels, presenting at the United Nations Sea of Solutions Conference, and presenting before the Senate and Congress. Mitch has also been the chairperson for highly relevant national conferences, such as the American Packaging Summit. Our other panelist is Jose Pacheco. I am not quite sure if Jose's been able to join in yet, but I'll go ahead and share the amazing work that Jose's doing in hopes that he's able to hop on. Jose Pacheco, born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico, is a business activist and community organizer. And good news, Jose made it on. Starting his career in compost at 21 years old, he worked at his father's company, Trudeau Agro Industrial Services, TAIS, picking up food scraps in local restaurants in the city and taking it to TAIS's composting and agroecological farm in Salinas, Puerto Rico. 5 years later, the company has diverted over 1 million pounds of food scraps and transformed them into compost for local farmers. And the TAIS farm using innovative techniques that make up fermentative composting, Incorporating his interest in sustainable urban development, Jose Miguel, or JM for short, looks for opportunities in collaborating with communities to share the concept of recycloponics as a vehicle for social and economical change. So thank you all so much for being here and for the work that you and your organizations are doing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to Clinton, who's going to give us a deep dive into contamination at composting sites. This will really set the tone for the rest of our questions for the panelists and really give you a good understanding of what contamination looks like at all levels, coming in the facility, sorting, and all the different, constraints that contamination can present for composters. So Maria, if you could go ahead and pass it over to Clinton, we'll go ahead and let him dive in.
Thank you, Blair, and hello to everybody. Yeah, I'm gonna zip through this and just kind of give you a quick overview of what we see here in A1 at A1 Organics. I am from A1 Organics. We're a commercial composter and compost manufacturer in Colorado. And go ahead, next slide. You working? Yeah, so just quickly, guys, we do process a lot, 425,000 tons annually in organic material. And we do accept what I'm going to refer to as mixed SSO, so mixed source separated organics. A lot of food waste, yard waste, all mixed together coming from various generators. Go ahead, next slide. And again, real quick, what's driving the cart? What I like to say, what's driving the cart? We all know this. A lot of this is because of zero waste, circular economies, climate change, sustainable diversion goals. There's a lot of people actively diverting organics from landfills, which is fantastic. We want to do that. Next slide. But the challenges that we are facing here and across the country is when you start accepting mixed SSO, and sometimes also within the compostable packaging stream as well, is a lot of contamination. It's coming in. It's green. It's lookalikes. It's potentially greenwashing. It's compostables that don't break down in the time they need to break down. It's just people not taking the time to throw things away or put the things in the right bin. So next slide. So I'm going to just give you a whole bunch of quick photos, guys. Like you can see here on the left, there's a couch cushion and a vacuum cleaner coming in on a mixed SSO load. On the left, you have plastic still in the box because someone, if it was potentially a grocery store, just threw it right in, didn't take the time to get it out. Next slide. Again, the one on the left is a green compostable bag coming out of a commercial, I believe that's a commercial grocery store, or no, I'm sorry, a commercial restaurant. And right there, right on the right, there's a bunch of contaminants within that bag. So if a commercial bag comes into my site, I have to get in that bag and open it up if I have the time to actually make that happen. On the volume that we are experiencing, we don't have the time to go through every single bag and make sure that there's no contaminants in those bags. A lot of cross-contamination happening at that level, a lot of challenges. On the right, that is literally there was a 45 cubic yard load of mixed SSO came in. I audited the load. That all came out of one load. And this is all curbside, residential, commercial. Again, all of that material that was contamination in that load coming into the site. Next slide. Again, I like showing these because you can see on the right, that is a blend of compostable packaging and non-compostable packaging. So I know Wendell talked about, I heard him just say that in his bio, but again, like making a 100% commitment to compostables so that you don't get the cross-contamination of which one works, which one doesn't. The consumers are not going to know. They're going to just throw it all in there, and that's what happened right there. Next slide. That's a TV, guys. That's a 46-inch plasma screen TV that came in on a load. I just happened to catch it. But that smashes down. That's glass. Glass is so dangerous for commercial composters. We cannot get glass out. It breaks down into small pieces, thousands and thousands of pieces, and then that goes out on your compost at the finished product. Very bad. Next slide. Again, another example, mixed within the green bag. Next slide. I'm trying to do good here, Blair. I'm going to stay within 7 minutes. Again, another example, contamination within the bag. Blue gloves, guys, blue gloves. Oh my gosh, blue gloves are the worst. On a commercial level, blue gloves are absolutely the worst. They come in all the time. Next slide. Again, I mentioned glass, guys. Like, we get full bags of trash mixed in with the green bags. Do we have the time to pull all that out? No, we don't. We don't have the time to do that. And again, it turns into small little particle plastic or glass like that. And if you are a homeowner and you're gonna put compost down on your grass and your child's out there running around and they cut their foot on that glass, that's a serious problem. It's a big risk. That is something that no one wants to have to deal with. Next slide. Again, it has a lot to do, guys, with lookalikes, greenwashing. I can't quite see my whole slide on this, but that's okay. You can see in all these photos, there's a lot of blue gloves in there. It's just when you open the stream and accept these materials in that stream, not just compostables, but you're opening up to food waste and trying to get food waste from all levels, contamination comes along with it no matter what. Next slide. Real quick, where did the next slide go? Waiting. Again, same example, glass, 100% unacceptable across the board. Next slide. Now here's finished product, guys. Fruit stickers are the worst too. We can't get them out. They will make it all the way through and they will be in the finished product, guaranteed. But you can see particle size, small particle size of plastics, glass, hard plastics, soft plastics, etc. Next slide. Next slide. I'm going to skip that one. This is the biggest thing that really affects the commercial composter, is the value proposition of the finished product. We get it out as much as we possibly can. Is it our responsibility as a commercial manufacturer of compost to get out contamination? No, it's the generator's responsibility. It shouldn't be in the first place. Are we working with it? Yes. But if all of a sudden we're producing lots and lots of compost with small fragment size contamination levels, the consumer looks at that as a dirty compost. It's a bad compost. It's going to affect my garden, and they're not going to want to buy it. They don't want to put that in their garden. So if you start putting, this leads to this value proposition. It makes it really challenging for me, the manufacturer of compost, to put that back out in the marketplace and say, hey, it's safe, it's okay, but there's going to be contamination in it. Very hard conversation to have, especially if there's glass contamination. And it's not working, guys. That does not work. Next slide. Again, we don't have to go into the solutions because we're going to talk about that. Next slide. This is just the one I want to end on, and we can keep going then. It's responsibility, guys, on it. Everybody needs to be on it. Like, A1 Organics has made a commitment to continue to accept this stream and work with our generators and figure out solutions. But we can't do it at a risk where we can't continue to do our jobs as a company, and that's to recycle organics. So it takes everybody on that list right there, a commitment to make sure that they keep the stream clean. Next slide. I think that should be good. Yeah. So hey, keep the stream clean. It's going to take all of us to make this happen. So I'll just end right there.
Thank you so much, Clinton. That was the best overview of what contamination looks like for composters and the challenges that it presents. Safety, the time commitment, the cost, it takes. And, just to kind of recap, some of the 3 most challenging contaminants that you see come through your facility sound like glass, the stickers on fruit and blue gloves.
Well,
So
light
attendees, if you guys could be keeping that in mind, when thinking about, some of the main, most challenging contaminants and how they're challenging for each their own reason. So thank you so much, Clinton, for sharing that. My next question is for both of the composters, Clinton as well as Jose Miguel. What infrastructure does the composting industry currently use to address contamination? And what are innovations that seem promising to address contamination at scale? And Maria, if we could click to the next slide, that would be great. So once again, just to run through that, what infrastructure does the composting industry currently use to address contamination, preferably sort out contamination, either, on the front end at the generator level or on site at the composting site? And what innovations are you guys excited about? So Jose, I'll kind of kick off with you, and then we'll
Thank you.
pass to Clinton.
Yeah. So I think this really depends on site size, right, and volume. So at A1 they have a ton of feedstock and material coming in. At our site we're a much smaller amount, but we're roughly about 25 tons a month, and so we're able to operate that with a team of 5. And but we've been very successful in keeping our percentage of contamination at under 3% and per cubic yard. And that allows us to really focus on quality of the feedstock over the volume of the feedstock, right? And the ideal place to be is the best of both worlds, both quality and volume, right? And so what we started with was focusing on food scraps that are going to have the lowest probability of there being contamination. And in this case, food manufacturers, right, because they receive the material without any labeling, and then also like restaurants, right? And so what we've done is we invested a lot more in outreach, right, and training. And so each one of our generators get visited, and that's more or less the human infrastructure that we have in place, right? And we're visiting our generator sites every 6 months, twice a year, to follow up, making sure to answer any of their questions, especially since turnover is so high at a lot of these service centers. Then there's that tendency of there just being a new crop of people that have no idea how compost works. And that's really the stigma that I'm sure Clinton and me and over here at Tice have gone through, is that association with trash, right? That association wherein, okay, well, it's just one bottle, you know what I mean? That's what's the worst that can happen. But one bottle in a process wherein you're grinding the material down turns into billions of particles, right? So it's a serious problem and a serious issue to dealing with that. And so in regards to the innovations that seem promising to address contamination at scale, a lot of the philosophy has been, to date, has been, well, we'll just screen it out at the end, right? And I think that's becoming more of a challenge. And just by viewing the photos, I'm sure Clinton can answer the question even better with data in regards to how well they can do that audit of the feedstock coming, of the material coming in. So I would say preventive is the best method, right? Preventing that material gets into the feedstock, and education and the lead solution to that is education, because it's such a simple philosophy. And I can get into much more minutia detail, right, in terms of like how the back end of a restaurant should operate, because that's where we have a lot of experience in, and how also food producers and manufacturers need to work on. The responsibility is a big issue here, right? Because the hauler brings it and the generator generates it, but the composter composts it, and he gets the sticking end of it, right? He gets all of the contamination. And I think there should be more tools that composters can have to be able to go up that chain of feedstock materials and reduce that contamination, have the authority, right? Have the resources to do it, because it's not cheap, to have people go on site and have them train continuously. It requires a lot of investment in education and in advertising and marketing as well.
Thank you. And Maria, if you wouldn't mind hopping, I believe, to the next slide, there's some examples of the preventative measures. So Jose, if you kind of want to walk us through these two examples, front of house and back of house, that would be great.
That. That's our latest, greatest innovation. Clinton, I haven't seen you since Colorado, since I visited. So, and Corey's there too, Carrie, Oceans, and Wendell. Hey guys, all of you. We installed this a couple months ago, actually, at a pharmaceutical. It's missing a lot of labeling. We haven't launched it yet, but it is actually physically touchable. And that is a stacking table designed to reduce volumes by almost 80%. So it's basically the user comes up to the table and then stacks the material according to their size. And it's very similar to when you were a child and you played with the frame with the triangle and the squares, and you fit the sizes to the square, to the shapes to the shapes to make things fit, right? To the blocks to the shapes. I'm sorry. And basically the concept here is, and I don't know if you guys can zoom in a little bit. On the left-hand side, you can see a funnel, right? And it's kind of tilted to one edge. And these are two copies, right? This is two stations on one table, right? And the idea here is basically the user comes up with their tray, and we're missing a little railing on the front so the person can place their tray. And this is for cafeterias that have mixed materials, right? And the idea here is that cafeteria has 100% compostable, BPI approved compostables, right? And so the funnel is for liquids, and that goes into the drainage that's connected to a pipe that goes out to the water treatment facility, right? Then the two stacks behind it, the two black tubes behind it, are for your cups. And on the right-hand side, right, the corner, the black tray, that is a 6-gallon tote, right, container that's embedded into the top of the table. And the concept here is you wave your hand, and when you wave your hand, behind that black spot, there's this looking like a trash can top. You wave your hand, and that opens, and that's a hands-free container top, and you empty your food scraps into that container that's below the top of the table, and then you stack the to-goes in a format such as, at the end of the day, the maintenance team comes in, clears that, doesn't use a single trash bag, right? They load these into 25-gallon totes, and then they take it to the site out on the back. Instead of there being a giant open-top container with flies and horridness, right? You instead just open up those containers, and then inside these blue containers, right, on the right-hand side in the photo that's here, there are divisions that basically the person places all these utensils stacked, all these materials stacked. So the concept here is basically no bags, and we reduce volume by 80%, and there's no heavy containers, because at the end of the day, what is really trash? Trash is water weight. Trash is food, basically, and it's not obviously trash. But once you take out the heaviest element that is considered trash, then the rest of the materials are recyclable. And that's the concept behind this, is by source separating and the generator at the generator's location, right, through education, through conscious action, through telling people that they can do it and they have the capability to do it, because again, this is like kids level, this is kindergarten level. Therein, you're able to have that deviation and that reduction, dramatic reduction. And so in a sense, we're able to pick up at these facilities every 2 weeks, all 14 days of generation, or 10 days, depending on how long the facility is open, if it's 5 days a week or 6 days or 7 days a week, and not using any trash cans. And so that's the concept that we're bringing to the table in this sort of act. And it is a huge gamble, right? Because we're trying to focus on training the cafeteria staff and training the people that are in these facilities. Please recognize that this is an employee-run facility. This isn't like a mall, you know what I mean? The people that are at this facility using these tables work there 6 days a week. And so once they get the ball running, you know what I mean? Once after the first 2 weeks and get the hurdle of going, then the only necessity is that the cafeteria does not change the configuration, right? And that requires then a constant stream of compostables going to that site, to the composting table or to that cafeteria, ensuring that the sizes are always the same. And that way there's no confusion at the end of the day. So it's very unique, and it's very experimental, but we have a lot of faith in this panning out because of the efficiencies that it provides. Imagine instead of your composter passing by once a week and generating all those emissions and, you know what I mean, the wear on the roads that generates, having them be able to go and visit your site 26 times a year, right? Just because they're passing by every 2 weeks ritualistically. That's the focus that we're trying to bring to the table, and increased efficiency at the generator's site. And then for odor control and vector control, we have other solutions, but I don't want to get into it too much. But we've had a lot of mucho éxito. We've had a lot of excitement, a lot of success in this so far. So I'm very happy to present it to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, at the generator level, what that preventative measure can look like. We'll chat about that, a little bit later too. Clinton, if you real quick could run us through what sorting, infrastructure technologies that you guys have on site, besides just a team handpicking out contaminants, if you could share, what infrastructure the industry has to sort out contaminants, that would be great.
Well, before I preface that, no one ever asked the compost manufacturer to remove contamination. I firmly believe it needs to be removed at the generator level. If this isn't a responsibility of the compost manufacturer to remove contamination. Are we using technology to try to get some of the contamination out? Yes. We have large machines called a hurricane. We have other, which is basically like a big vacuum sweeper. Like we're trying to keep it clean, but at a very high cost. It's expensive. It's expensive to run these machines, purchase these machines, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So on that note, we do not have hand sorters on the ground. That's expensive. It's a lot of labor. It's a terrible job. You don't want to be out there digging through this stuff, trying to get it out. I've done it. It's not fun. All this needs to come back. And what I really like what Jose's pointing out here is, the loads at a small scale, when it's 5 cubic yards or less, are much easier and a lot more efficient to be able to get it out, find it, see it, and get these materials out before they even get to the compost manufacturer. That's what needs to happen. It has to happen. You need to have audits, people on top of it, looking at it at the cart at the curbside. If it gets to a transfer facility, it's looked at again, everything's removed. Once it lands at a compost manufacturer and hits the ground, we audit it, and if it doesn't pass, we send it back and it goes to the landfill. Like all hands on deck. It's not the responsibility of the compost manufacturer to figure out innovative ways to clean compost. Period. That it's too much. It's too hard. It has to start at the generator level. And solutions, what we think, this is it's a big conversation. It's really hard to get this all in 1 hour. But really, I like this solution of small haulers. Like the people that are the cleanest are these, what we like to call boutique compost organics collectors in small buckets. They're talking to their customers right then and there. They can educate right then and there. They can open the bucket and look in and go, oh, you know what, guys? Hey, stop putting in these twist ties. They're not compostable. And it's hard. That model needs to be moved up and used at a city, like if you're doing a curbside city recycling program, that model needs to be introduced. All hands on deck. You have to audit it. That requires more cost. It starts making it more expensive, but it's what has to happen, guys. It's not up to the compost manufacturers to figure out better ways to clean the compost, because ultimately it comes down to screen size and how much, once we get down to a 1/4 inch screen, which is 1/4 inch particle size, it's going through. And if that's glass, like Jose said, glass is 100% unacceptable. Glass is so dangerous. We can't have glass in there. And I audited 15 loads the other day. Every single one had glass. Every single one. It wasn't just like glass here and here. Every single load had glass in it. So it's compost manufacturers are going to just stop because it's too much risk. That's what's going to happen. So we don't want that to happen. We don't want that to happen. So sorry. I don't want to be like the the mean guy here, but I'm going to stand pretty firm on this.
And that's why we're having these conversations, to really understand at the composter level y'all's challenges and how we can collectively work together on solutions. Before moving to our packaging industry panelist, you brought up a really good point, Clinton, that when you do get feedstock that is too contaminated, you have to landfill it. Does that cost fall on the composter, or are you able to pass it back to that, customer generator? Does that add a whole nother layer of the cost, kind of prohibitiveness of contamination?
Well, yes. The short answer to that is yes. It depends on how your operation is working. At A1 Organics, we are not haulers. We do not have a hauling division as a part of our company. That is all third party, and we work with contracted haulers, or we work with, other major players in the state or in the country for hauling services. So ultimately, it's not the hauler's responsibility either. It could fall on the hauler a little bit, or it could fall on the hauler if they have a transfer facility and things are getting cross-contaminated at that level. So then, yes, that could happen there. But ultimately, it goes back to the generator. And if we have, it's just going to go upstream. So like I say, we reject a load, we charge a fee for that. That goes back on the hauler. The hauler is going to have to take that back onto wherever they picked up that service. I can't speak for the haulers and say that they're doing that at certain levels. I don't know that. But again, it's going to go back upstream ultimately. But it comes back to the generator. We have to, and at many different levels, we have to get the generators to keep the stream clean. And then we got to hold, like Jose said, he was talking about grade school. I hate to say it, but we have to treat them like fifth graders and fourth graders, and we have to audit, and we have to look at it, and we have to provide feedback, tons of education.
And we really need to also focus on, and sorry to interrupt, Quentin, but
no, you're good.
Producers' responsibility too. You know what I mean? EPR legislation, because it's contamination that's sent by corporate entities, right? That their bottom line isn't the environment, right? It's more like the bottom line is profit, right? And so if they're going to make cheaper packaging that lasts longer, right, and it will stores better, and it doesn't affect their product, but it affects the quality of the compost and it confuses the consumer, that's not their problem, because there's nothing behind it to really stick it to them, you know what I mean, so to speak, in French, right? And that's the same issue that we're having now. It's just there's no extended producer responsibility. So for the attendees, look up local legislation, EPR, and you know what I mean, really push for that to get passed, because it is a serious problem for composters and for haulers and for the entire community.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Jose, and that actually leads us into our kind of next question, unless you or Clinton have anything else on contamination in your compost pile. Nope. Awesome. Well, so we've heard from our composters, and we'll hear from them again, but kind of, looking at the other side of it. So a lot of contamination is packaging and compostable lookalikes. And so, organics diversion bills, they're designed to bring in a massive influx of organic material to composters. But unfortunately, like Clinton was saying, with that influx of material, you get an influx of contamination from those compostable lookalikes and other packaging. So, Wendell, as states like Vermont are trying to get a grasp on the contamination issue, they're saying no to packaging altogether in the compost pile. And that means compostable packaging can't be composted because of contamination issues associated with plastic packaging and other bad actors. So, can you elaborate on some of the benefits of compostables in a composting pile, and how do we differentiate compostables from the growing contamination and contamination conversation?
I think I'll defer the first part of that to the composters, right? I wouldn't want to speak for them so much on the benefits of the products in the pile, as much as I would want to say that the likelihood of a customer being, a potential fit for organics collection, whether they're residential or commercial, increases with the use of compostable packaging. So we do see this a lot, right? So like Clinton's talking about his like favorite boutique customers, that he gets that really like do this, right? My guess is that a lot of those conversations with A1 started because that boutique restaurant started using compostable packaging. And so there is this like connection to like the use of the packaging almost as like a front door to the broader conversation of organics diversion. Now, that may be all well and good, but if it's not working, and it's clearly not working based on everything that we've heard so far, then they're not actually a good customer for Clinton, right? But I mean, from a differentiation point of view, right, and like what we on the industry side can do about this, it's all about labeling, right? Which we're very focused on as an industry, and which we're starting to see state lawmakers chime in on this, and got our first set of hard regulations coming in July 2024 in Washington, specifically addressing use of color, right? So like not all compostable packaging is an equal contamination risk, right? Like the plasticky looking things tend to be harder for consumers to differentiate. We know that. And so there's going to be hard conversations about, bringing print to those items. There's also this whole issue of lookalike items, right? And making products that are cheaper than certified compostable products that look, feel, and are marketed as compostable products, like intentionally, to deceive effectively. Huge issue. And then there's this whole thing of like, what do you do about, say you talk about bringing green tint or green print to compostable things. What do you do about the fact that it's possible and likely that Sprite and 7-Up are going to continue to make green tinted soda bottles, right? Like, so how do you keep out or carve out specific labeling practices for compostables that actually like allow those markings or those strategies to do what they're designed to do, which is to educate consumers, right? And so there's a ton of focus on item labeling and a ton of work and a ton of progress that the compostable products industry can make there, right? And then there's all of this education piece. So Jose talked about it, Clinton's talked about it too. Like, what do we do there, and like who's frankly responsible for doing that, right? And what's the right way to like mechanize, right, and strategize on what that should look like, because like most people out there who probably like have the ability to add organics collection at their curbside may even not know what the word composting means, let alone like how to tell the difference between like a compostable cup and a non-compostable cup. So like we're totally starting from scratch, right? And then I think the connection to EPR, right, to me is like, okay, if we've got that funding source that's coming from the packaging side, like what do we do with that, right? First of all, like how do we make sure that it's actually going to composters, right? And then like what's the best use of that funding? Is it going to be like in on-site contamination mitigation strategies that are too expensive for Clinton and Jose to employ on their own, like as one thought, right? But we haven't like identified what the right, landing spot for that EPR funding stream that's going to come. Right now we're just like trying to do the work right with the states to make sure that they design legislation that actually gets composters paid, because believe it or not, like that isn't the way that the early EPR bills have been written. But we've got a good example now in Colorado of a program that actually is set up to work in a way that composters can actually benefit from the funding that's associated with compostable products, right? So there's a lot going on here, right? But like suffice to say that the compostable products industry is hearing composters loud and clear on this. The contamination is the biggest issue, and that like it's really shouldn't be their problem to fix, right? It should be our problem to fix, and the users of compostable packaging should be working to make sure that we're sending organic streams to composters that they can actually work with.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wendell. And Savannah or Maria, if you have a second to drop an example of the updated BPI label in the chat so people know what to be looking for, that would be great. Should have had a slide for that, but y'all look in the chat at that BPI label. And yeah, that's the new standardized labeling from BPI for compostable packaging, guaranteeing that it's commercially compostable. But real quick, to go back to our composters, we've talked about the challenges of compostable packaging and their lookalikes. Are there any benefits of compostable packaging, whether that be in your pile or getting more organics to your piles? Clinton, Jose, if one of you guys would like to take that on.
I'll jump in for a little bit on this one. Do compostables provide like a nutrient value to the compost? No, they are a pass-through. They're more of a what I would say is like a bulking agent or something we use in the process of composting. A lot of times it comes down to the generator of where it's coming from. And the best example I can give you, if you're let's say you're an arena, a sports arena, and you're doing all compostables. First of all, you're doing it 100% commitment to all compostable materials at that arena. Don't give any opportunity for cross-contamination. But second, as a compost manufacturer, we're going to end up with 90%, 95% packaging and maybe 5% food. Most people aren't going to throw away a $15 hot dog. They're going to eat it. They're not going to throw it in there. So at that type of generator, we're getting a lot of packaging, and it's really just a pass through. So now you're talking more about like a treatment. It's a treatment plan for this type of packaging. But now if you think about just the bag, like a bio bag, for example, that is a convenience factor for diverting food waste, especially like on a tabletop container that a residential homeowner is using. Like they don't, it's going to be a little slimy, it's going to be messy, and it's kind of a convenience factor that helps, I would say, potentially divert more food waste because of the convenience of it. But again, sometimes that's a lightweight material. They might get the wrong one. It might not break down in the time it needs to. There's a ton out on the market. Everybody's like, which one do I buy? I don't know. I'm confused. It leads to contamination. They get lifted out before they even go through the process. So they end up at the landfill anyway. So you just spent more money on something that potentially did divert some organics, but ended up in the landfill too. It's complicated. And I do believe there's a place for compostables, specifically in the food service industries in that lane. But when we start talking about maybe, I don't know, just pick a chip company, a chip company making a bag that's compostable, that's going to be really confusing for the consumer. We don't want that. We don't want to be a package, we don't want to just compost packaging. Like that's the goal, the original goal, and I know Wendell can attest to this, the original goal is to divert more food waste, divert more organics. That was the goal. That's the goal here. Not creating, and I don't want to go on that subject, but I'll stop right there. Jose, jump in.
That could be a whole nother hour webinar for sure.
We see it more as a bulking agent, but I mean, it exists the potential to be something more too. So I mean, I think really what needs to happen is there needs to be more education on the differentiation in general in terms of the quality of the material that's being received. So BPI, for example, needs to be more highlighted. And then there just needs to overall be more action at a school level for the next generation of, U.S. participants in society, right? These citizens, like, to be involved in this process, right? And so I think that's really like kind of the direction it needs to be pointed in, is an investment in education, an investment in understanding how this process works. Because at the end of the day, we don't all see what comes out the other end. We're not all gardeners, we're not all, farmers, but we can't really live without them either, obviously, not at scale. So it is so fundamental to the existence of our society to have compost and be able to manage, especially, you know, places where there isn't any more landfill space. So there is really no like if, ands, or buts. It's like when, you know what I mean? When are we going to really invest in this sort of action? Because it's so essential to sustain society, and it has to happen soon. And you know, it is going to help having more conversations like this, and you know, highlighting the problems and really investing in it as well.
Thank you, Jose. To your point, the easiest people or the people that has been the easiest to teach how to compost back in my composting days were kindergartners and first graders. So that school education is another great solution. And so diving into more solutions, Mitch, we would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for waiting. So Mitch comes from Recycle Across America. And Mitch, I would love to hear from you some lessons learned from the recycling industry, specifically, you know, around contamination and standardized labeling.
Right. Thank you so much. Well, the same, right? We have to get the public and the consumer to walk up to a bin or some type of receptacle and put the right bin. And I wish we had some visuals on the screen right now just to show what that experience has been for recyclers and composters, people not on the back side, but at the front side of the bin. If you saw photos of what recycling bins and composting bins look like, in addition to compost packaging, you would understand why people aren't doing it properly, why they're skeptical, why they're apathetic, and why they sometimes appear not to care. Because the way that recycling and composting is presented to the consumer and the public is done in such a way where it looks like it shouldn't be taken seriously. And so we're talking about the same thing. In fact, the standardized labels that we created for recycling bins, we also have compost and compostable and food standardized labels for bins as well. And they're used by some of the national parks and by schools and airports who have composting accessibility. You know, there's so many things that are involved in this situation with composting that can be addressed easily. I think when it first was introduced, it became a little bit of the wild, wild west, where everybody wanted to get into creating packaging that was compostable, and some of it was very questionable. And a lot of it looked exactly like the packaging that they're trying to compete with or do away with. And I think there was a missed opportunity to come out with a very unified, even you might have competing brands, but come out with a unified strategy of how to make composting successful in the US. And in my opinion, it would have started with food first. Make it as basic as possible to kick it off the ground, and to really eliminate the risk of complex contamination, which is what some of these processors are experiencing right now. But the standardized labels on recycling, we equate that to standardized road signs. And all of us only had to go through driver's ed at 15 or 16 years old. And then we get in a car with hundreds of millions of other people in the US and never really think about being educated again. We instantly know how to drive and the change on every street. Yet instinctively, we know how to change our behavior and to drive safely with everyone wherever we are in the country. What we're talking about to make recycling work and to make composting work is not rocket science, but we have to apply things that are easier for the public to be able to act on their good intentions correctly. And part of that is standardized labels for bins, whether it's compost bins, food bins, or recycling bins. It needs to be legislated at a state level, at a federal level. The industry of composters, I think, really have to unify, because behind the scenes, there's some underlying and very powerful influencers that are hindering the viability of recycling, or of not recycling, of composting. And that is the landfill industry. They love the fact that composting is complex and not working well, because that means they can be assured that there's more of these materials continuing to go into their landfill, the traditional landfill. The virgin plastics industry and the fossil industry love the fact that the packaging is often misleading and complex, because that's guaranteed that a lot of this material is going into compost facilities and therefore contaminating, and therefore the demand for virgin plastic continues to grow, and fossil fuel. So we're a huge believer of kind of getting things back on track from the very beginning again. And one of them is to introduce standardized labels. The second is to work with groups like BPI that are verification of truly compostable products, if we are going to be in this world of compostable packaging. And then the third is to make sure that, we're growing the baseline of food first. Let the kindergartners and all of us learn the proper way to compost the basic that is the easiest for us to understand, which is strictly food. And then, in addition to the standardized labels, make sure that there's a unified national campaign. We were lucky enough to get celebrities like Kristen Bell and Bill Maher and a number of other celebrities to be part of our national campaign to help people recycle right. I think if there's a unified effort from the compost industry to unify and to say, let's get this back on the track, let's create a national consistent education campaign on mainstream media to help people understand, that they need to push for composting even being available in their community. They need to start with food first. They need to know what a compostable plastic bag looks like, what's verified, BPI certified. And then as you get into compostable packaging, what are those products? What should restaurants be buying? What should households be buying and schools be buying that they know is truly compostable with these processors and verified as truly compostable, not a lookalike? So, it's complicated, and there's a lot of pain right now in this process, but I think we almost need to not hit the stop button, but definitely get this back in a very strategic way to get it on the right track, and understand that there are these underlying industries that absolutely want composting to fail, and they will make sure that it stays confusing. And the best thing that the composting industry can do is unite to make sure that they're not a victim of those other influences. And of course, get policymakers and legislators on board as well.
Thank you so much, Mitch. What a good way to wrap up our hour of really good and honest, compost conversations. You guys have mentioned, compostable packaging is still an emerging industry. So we want to collaborate with composters and other stakeholders, across industries on circular solutions. So thank you all so much for your unique insights from your industry, organization. I know we are close to our 2:00 mark, and definitely wanted to save time for Q&A. So I'm happy to stay on for an additional 10 or 15 minutes. I welcome any panelists that have the time to do so to stay on as well. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and dive into our Q&A with the folks who are able to stay on for about 10 or 15 more minutes. But thank you all again so much for being here. So what we'll do is feel free to go ahead and drop any questions in the chat or use the raised hand feature, which is once again at the top bar underneath reactions. You'll see a little hand. And then Savannah is also going to give everyone the ability to unmute themselves. So you can also just simply click the mic button to unmute yourself. So feel free, fire away.
Yes. Yes, and I am doing that now. Right. 1 second, folks. And actually, to start, there's a few different questions within the chat and comments around compostable packaging in the compost pile. And I wanted to offer space to Carrie Oceans of the United States Composting Council, who had additional thoughts on it. Carrie, if you're able to unmute, wanted to give you space as well to elaborate on your point in the chat.
Sure, thanks. Hi, everyone. I did, Clinton, I love you. You're awesome. You guys do a great job.
It was a great.
But I did have to kind of correct that statement about what happens to compostable plastics in a pile. The fact that they are compostable means that they break down. And if they're breaking down, microbes are using them to access nutrients. They don't provide typical nutrients. Pretty much they're all carbon and very small amounts of other things. So they're being used for energy, for building blocks, but they're certainly not inert. And that's why they're there, as opposed to regular plastics, which are inert and do pass through, and those are a problem. So I did want to kind of make that little correction. I also, and then as a thought on, I was thinking about, whose job is it to correct contamination, and your statement that it's not the composter's job, but I think it is the composter's job, but it's not just the composter's job, it's everyone's job, and it's everyone has to work together. I mean, as a composter, not you specifically, but composters make decisions about their business model and what they're going to accept and what they're going to process. There are composters that go out there and purchase their feedstocks because they want super clean feedstocks, and they're focused on producing a very clean product. That's not the model you guys have. That's not a model a lot of composters have. They get paid to take what other people don't want and make the best of it. And obviously there are all those costs, and you did a great job showing what those costs are in terms of and the limits to how much you can do in terms of reducing contamination. Really interesting. There actually are 3 webinars this month about contamination on this topic, so it's a really hot topic. I will shamefully plug ours at the end of this month, which is a follow-on from our conference conversations about contamination, but it's going to be an ongoing conversation for a long time. When I worked at at a leaf facility, there's contamination. There's hardly a load of compostables that doesn't have some level of contamination. But when you enter the food realm, because of the inability to train individuals on how to separate correctly, the contamination goes way up, increasing your costs. So sorry, no specific question, but I felt obligated to kind of get those thoughts out there.
Thank you, Carrie. Natasha, I saw that you also had your hand raised at one point. Natasha, if you're still on, feel free to, ask any questions or add anything as another passionate community composter. So if you're still on, definitely want to give you the space to do that as well.
Sure. I think it just kind of echoes what Carrie just said. And I think, is his name Jose Miguel? I think right as I raised my hand, I think he said it's kind of similarly what I was trying to share. And I think it would be great when generator actually is equated to the producer or the person actually creating the waste at some point. Because I've worked in recycling for many years, and no matter how much education and outreach you do, you want someone to put this in that bin or that bin or this bin. The truth is most single-use waste should be compostable, right? And until we're really creating circular waste streams or creating laws that mandate that waste actually becomes that, I don't think you can actually put it on to be the onus of the person just buying the twist ties or buying the single-use whatever gets caught up in your compost. And so that's all I was going to share, is that I think it's really got to come back to who is making the waste, because I think Germany is a place that doesn't have landfills anymore, like we've all mentioned, and so they actually have ways that someone that makes a product has got to get their waste back and then recycle it or create new life out of it. And so until we have more of that, where the onus is put on the person actually creating the waste to create it to where it is compostable, or that they can recapture it and create new products out of it, I think more has to be shown on that. And then I also wanted to share, and I don't know, it's more of a question. I know, like in Korea, they're doing things where like they make people separate their food waste in certain ways, and it's got to be discarded in just certain ways. And I'm not that versed on it, but I thought maybe I would just think of that.
So, 3 points. Germany, they burn a significant portion of their trash and export of other some of its other waste materials. So that's something to recognize, the fact that waste energy necessarily isn't a solution, right? Because of generating emissions, and also we're generating ash material that's not compostable. And then the Korean comment is really interesting, because I recently came across a friend of mine that is from Korea that showed me a video of a post-event, right? A major, I think it was like a soccer event. They were picking up at the end of the event. They put a certain music in the stadium, and everyone just starts picking up all the material that they left on the ground, and they don't have any janitorial services, and they it's already imbued into the culture, right? And so I think that's really what's struggling right now in the U.S. and its territories, right? I live in Puerto Rico, and we have currently about 1 to 2 years left of landfill space at current usage, and we're really are pushing that model of the circle, you know what I mean, understanding, and something that we being an island, we depend on food importations. 85% of our food is imported, and so what we're doing is we're connecting, right, the necessity of food scraps to create compost also with compost creating food, right, and closing that loop as securely as possible. So I think a model like the one that we're looking for is a model that's less centralized, right? And A1 is a huge facility, you know what I mean? Clinton may not agree with this, but like more composters at smaller sites, right? And having those connected to farms in the area that create food, and then where we have these boutique haulers, right, that collect food scraps and take it to a site, we have those boutique haulers also distribute food. And how would the economy work on this? How would all this structure out? Well, that's that's the detail, right? The devil's in the detail. But I think really getting that model across, that we need to really think about circular economies, right? And understanding that we live on a finite planet, and we really need to make capitalism work for the planet. You know what I mean? Really need to understand that some things are worth spending and investing capital and protecting our soil, because that's what's preserved us, and it's what's gotten to the point where we are right now. And we really cannot separate ourselves any more than we are already now. So we are, on a planet, and that planet is a spaceship that's going hundreds of thousands of kilometers per hour, you know what I mean, flying through space. And we really need to focus on the fact that our soil is the reason why we're still here. And creating and preserving soil and creating and preserving food is really connected with our ancestors, and it's connected with our entire human history, and maintaining, our bodies healthy. So yes. It's a topic that really makes me have a lot of passion towards it. But no government or nobody's gotten it quite right yet. And I think the smaller the scale, the more sustainable it is overall, because that's more or less where we came from when we were villages and townships. It was smaller, and now we're dealing with these huge volumes, and we really need to adjust and see when we can find these efficiencies again. And I think it's really just bringing the farmer back onto the table, and getting the urban farmer on board, and investing in those communities and in these haulers and in these composters, and get that wheel going.
Thank you so much for all those insights. All right, I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to address one question that came in through the registration form. How do you distinguish PFAS-free packaging from not PFAS-free packaging? The BPI label, look for that BPI label. The new standardized BPI label is synonymous with PFAS-free packaging. To get BPI certified, you have to be PFAS-free. Wendell, anything you would like to add there?
No, but only that, remember that PFAS is really only a conversation in molded fiber, right? Because it was a strengthening grease resistance agent for fiber packaging. So none of the bioplastics are going to be a PFAS issue. So keep that in mind.
Thank you. All right, so 2 questions that came in around specific items and your thoughts on them, as contamination. What about coffee pods? Is that a challenge in your compost pile?
Yeah, well, yeah. Coffee pods. I mean, are they completely compostable? Do they break down in the time that we would require them to break down? Do they have like a little wrapper on the top? Like it's really you're asking the consumer to try to figure this out, and it's really challenging. Another one that I can throw on there that makes it just as hard is like a diaper,
I was
compostable
just
diaper.
about to ask that.
I mean,
Diaper and dog poop
yeah.
bags that are BPI certified or commercially compostable. Thoughts on diapers and dog poop bags?
Don't do diapers.
Don't do that. We can't accept. I mean, we don't accept them. We won't take them.
You can't take.
That's human feces inside of a package. Like just because it's a small baby, it's still the same thing. It's regulated by the EPA. That's not something that we can process because it hasn't been treated. So.
And I'm assuming same for dog poop bags as well.
Yeah, we don't do those either.
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump on. I really appreciate what Carrie did. Thank you, Carrie, for calling me on that pass-through one. That was exactly right. That was the wrong word to use, so I appreciate that. And also, Wendell brought up something as well that was really important, which was words. Like, we're not using all of the words correctly. Like, organics recycling uses the process of composting to create compost. Composting, so like, we got to get our words clear and get everybody on the same page using the same terminology correctly. And I think that's really like a good point to just make sure that is out there to everybody to remember that.
Food scraps are pre-compost. That's how we've more or less started sharing our lingo. Is like food scraps are pre-compost that then get composted. Because calling something compost when it's not compost also devalues the composter, because it's like, here's this thing, you know what I mean, that's already compost. No, that's not compost. It has to go through an entire process. So invisibilizing, it makes, at least me as an operator, right, I feel invisibilized when somebody tells me here's compost when it's really just food scraps. And that goes to show, like how there's so much of a gap between in education and understanding of how this process works.
Thank you. With our last 4 minutes, does anyone else have any questions for our panelists or anything they would like to share? Yeah, Megan, feel free to go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. Hey, Jose Miguel, also, I just want to say I love your energy. You are super exciting to listen to, and I love people passionate about compost, period. So awesome, cheers to you. You mentioned one of your strategies for reducing the volume at that pharmaceutical company was to have them stack things. And I was wondering, were you including like stacking compostable packaging? Like were cups included? Because I was under the impression that stacking, especially PLA products, are actually really bad for compost because they're, they kind of stick together and then get really gunky. So if you could just elaborate on that, would be awesome.
Of course. Yeah. So this goes to what size fits what facility, right? We have equipment that can grind, stumps and reduce material, and so it helps us to have that sort of equipment and then receive this sort of material. So when PLA stack together and we throw it into the grinder, that material comes out basically a pulp material, right? A dry pulp material. And then we spread it out on our compost pile, and then we're able to then compost it pretty uniformly. So that's basically the advantage, in terms of the generator being able to reduce their cost in terms of transport, right, to our facility, because it's less trips that are being had, and then also the ability for us to be able to just process that material in bulk, and it being way less contaminated as well, because there aren't these like trash cans that people don't read and instead just throw it. It's very different, the dynamic, when you're doing something that's habitual, instead of having a single stream wherein that was a big issue with recycling in general, is when they transitioned to single stream. This caused contamination rates to go through the roof. And it was one of the reasons why then China decided, in Operation Sword in 2017 to just say no more, recyclables. And then this caused this chain of effects, right? So this is what we're trying to do, but in a positive fashion, right? Is try to get these groups of people that live in huge sites, huge facilities, right, that are employees there, to then adopt this sort of regime, and this sort of practice and this habit. And we've done it in about 2 different sites. One of them was a school, and the other one was another manufacturing facility. And COVID hit, and that kind of shut the whole thing down because there was no kids in the school. And now then we're retaking it at another site with a much more fashionable type of installation. And we will see how it goes. Labeling and marketing, it's going to go hand in hand. It's really different. A1 and Tice's operations, we're haulers, right, and composters. A1 is just a composter, right? So it's really important to differentiate that, because we have higher control of our feedstocks and our material. They're more at the mercy of these haulers and these generators. So it's really difficult when you're just a composter. I mean, it's difficult to begin with, but there is that differentiation. We are actually very unique in the sphere of operators, because we're also haulers, and it has its pros and its benefits and its challenges. And the scalability too, right? Because you're operating a fleet of equipment, of composting equipment, and then also a fleet of equipment of collections. And it's not easy. It's very hard, especially at a small company, to be able to manage all those things.
Yeah, you said with 5 people, right? That's amazing.
Well, that's at our operations site. Then there's 3 in admin, another 6 in collections. So overall, we're like 15 people.
Nice.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, you really are doing a lot.
Yeah, no, 5 people would be crazy.
Okay.
One in the Bobcat and the other in the truck at the same time. I don't know how that would happen.
A lot of multitasking. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Can I say something real quick, Blair?
Yeah,
Yeah, I would say I really appreciate what the differentiation that you make, and I want to leave, before this is over, I want to leave on a very positive note, which is, we are recycling a lot of organic material, and not all of our material is SSO. It's a percentage, and there was a slide that I skipped over really quickly during my presentation in the beginning, which showed the site, one of our sites, and the mixed SSO is specifically kept to the side and away from all the other sites, because we don't want to cross-contaminate, our processing. So I don't want us to, it's not all that, and it's really great, the benefits, and Jose, you brought this up earlier, talking about restoring our soil. To restore our soil, getting compost into the soil, so is such an amazing opportunity, and that's where we're going, and we're going to get there. And I love the standardized sign analogy, talking about stop signs. That is brilliant. Wendell, that is that is brilliant. That's what we need. We need people to be able to just figure it out quickly and know how to do it. So, sorry. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for all 20 of you that have hung out for an extra 15, 17 minutes. We really, really appreciate you coming to the table to talk about compost and how we can scale composting and create these soil-lutions. So thank you so much. Please do check out all of our composters and their organizations. We'll be hosting another webinar in the fall, so we hope to see you there, and I hope that everyone has a great rest of their afternoon. Thanks, everyone.